5:41 a.m. January 22nd, 2026. Dayton, Ohio. 400 federal agents sat in vehicles across 19 locations in 3 states. Engines running, radios silent, waiting for one word. At the ProWork National Staffing headquarters on West 3rd Street, a 12-agent entry team from the FBI's Cleveland field office positioned at the front entrance. A second team covered the rear loading dock. A third moved toward a basement stairwell, a stairwell that led to the largest identity document factory the Bureau had ever seen in the Midwest. At 5:42 a.m., the command came through encrypted channels. One word: execute. Doors came down simultaneously at all 19 ProWork branch offices across Ohio, Indiana, and Michigan. At 7 client work sites, meatpacking plants, fulfillment centers, construction staging areas, ICE Homeland Security Investigations agents moved in with federal warrants. By 6:15 a.m., 138 individuals were in handcuffs. The CEO of ProWork, a woman with an MBA from Ohio State University, was arrested in her Upper Arlington home while still in her bathrobe. The operation was called Paper Trail. It had taken federal investigators 4 months to build the case. What they uncovered was a billion-dollar fraud machine disguised as a staffing company. To understand how it worked, go back 3 years. ProWork National Staffing was incorporated in the state of Ohio in March 2023. Its founder and CEO was Karen Whitfield, age 44, a former human resources executive who had spent 12 years at a Fortune 500 logistics company before being terminated in a corporate restructuring. She had an MBA from Ohio State's Fisher College of Business. She understood workforce management, labor law, payroll systems, and the chronic demand for temporary workers in industries that couldn't find enough of them. The business model was legitimate on its surface. ProWork recruited and placed temporary workers in blue-collar positions: meatpacking, poultry processing, warehouse fulfillment, light manufacturing, commercial construction. These industries operated on razor-thin margins and relied heavily on staffing agencies to fill positions. Turnover was constant. Demand was enormous. Companies didn't ask many questions as long as workers showed up and had the right paperwork. Whitfield opened her first office in Dayton. Within 6 months, she had contracts with 3 poultry processing plants in western Ohio. Workers arrived, presented identification, filled out I-9 employment verification forms, and went to work. ProWork handled all the documentation. The client companies paid ProWork, and ProWork paid the workers. By the end of 2023, ProWork had expanded to 7 offices. By mid-2024, 12. By October 2025, the company operated 19 branch offices and had placed an estimated 11,000 workers annually. Revenue exceeded $90 million per year from staffing fees alone. A Columbus Business Journal featured ProWork as a Midwest success story, a homegrown company solving the region's labor shortage. The article quoted Whitfield, "We connect hardworking people with companies that need them. That's all we do." That was not all they did. The real business operated beneath the staffing operation. ProWork didn't just place workers, it manufactured them. Here's how the system functioned. An undocumented worker, someone without legal authorization to work in the United States, would arrive at a ProWork branch office. They would be directed to a back room. There, a ProWork employee would photograph them, collect basic biographical information, and offer them an employment package. The package cost between $3,500 and $8,000, depending on what was included. At the low end, a fabricated Social Security card and a matching state identification card. At the high end, a Social Security card, a state ID, a work authorization document, and in some cases, a counterfeit permanent resident card. These were not amateur forgeries. They were produced in a basement facility beneath ProWork's Dayton headquarters. A 1,200-square-foot space equipped with commercial-grade card printers, UV reactive ink systems, hologram overlay presses, and lamination machines capable of producing documents that could pass visual inspection, and, in many cases, basic electronic verification. The operation had a database. 280,000 stolen identities, purchased in bulk from dark web data brokers. The identities belonged to deceased individuals, children under 10 years old, elderly nursing home residents, and incarcerated persons. People unlikely to notice or report that their social security numbers were being used. Each worker received a complete identity kit, a name that matched a real social security number, documents that looked authentic. ProWork then filed the I-9 forms with the client companies using these fabricated credentials. The workers went to their shifts. The companies paid ProWork. ProWork paid the workers, minus the cost of their identity packages, which was typically deducted from their first several paychecks. The scale was staggering. Over 3 years, ProWork produced identity packages for an estimated 9,000 workers. At an average price of $5,000 per package, the document operation alone generated $45 million. But that was only one revenue stream. The larger financial impact came from the downstream fraud. Workers using stolen social security numbers generated false wage records. Tax withholdings were filed under identities belonging to real people, or people who had once been real. The IRS received W-2 forms for workers who didn't exist, creating phantom tax records that would take years to untangle. Identity theft victims, or the families of deceased individuals whose numbers had been used, faced credit damage, false tax obligations, and bureaucratic nightmares. Federal investigators later calculated the total economic damage at $1.1 billion over 3 years when accounting for wage fraud, tax evasion, identity theft losses, and the cost of remediation for victims. And nobody noticed. For 2 years, nobody noticed. The first crack appeared in October 2025. ICE Homeland Security Investigations conducted a routine I-9 audit at a poultry processing plant in Logansport, Indiana. The plant employed approximately 900 workers. HSI agents reviewed employment records and ran Social Security numbers through the federal E-Verify system and the Social Security Administration's database. 340 workers failed verification. Their Social Security numbers belonged to deceased individuals or to children under the age of 10. 340 out of 900, a 38% failure rate. Industry average for I-9 discrepancies at large employers, 2 to 4%. 38% was not a red flag, it was a siren. HSI agent Diana Reeves, based out of the Indianapolis field office, pulled the placement records. Every single one of the 340 flagged workers had been placed by the same staffing agency, ProWork National Staffing, Dayton, Ohio. Reeves filed her findings. Within 72 hours, the case was elevated. The FBI's Cleveland field office was brought in. So was IRS Criminal Investigation. The investigation was assigned a name, Operation Paper Trail. The initial scope was narrow, determine whether ProWork was negligent in verifying worker documents or whether the company was actively producing them. The answer came faster than anyone expected. FBI forensic accountants began with ProWork's financial records. They subpoenaed bank statements from 6 financial institutions. What they found didn't match the profile of a staffing company. ProWork's declared revenue was $92 million for 2025. Staffing margins in the temp labor industry typically ran 12 to 15%. That meant ProWork should have been netting roughly $12 to $14 million. Instead, the company was depositing an additional $4 to $6 million per quarter in cash. Money that didn't correspond to any client invoices, payroll cycles, or service contracts. The cash deposits were structured. Multiple deposits below $10,000, spread across different branches and different bank accounts. Classic smurfing. The technique used to avoid triggering currency transaction reports that banks are required to file with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Over 18 months, ProWork had made more than 2,000 structured cash deposits totaling approximately $31 million. If you're watching this and finding value in the investigation, hit the like button. It helps more people see this story. The FBI obtained a warrant for ProWork's internal communications, email servers, text messages, internal chat platforms. What they found was a parallel operation running inside the company's own infrastructure. Whitfield had built a compartmentalized system. Branch office managers knew about the document services. They were the ones who directed workers to the back rooms. But only 3 people had access to the production facility in the Dayton basement: Whitfield herself, her brother-in-law David Mercer, who managed the printing operation, and a man named Yevgeny Dobrynin, a Ukrainian-born IT specialist who maintained the stolen identity database. Dobrynin was the technical architect. He had purchased stolen identity datasets from 3 separate dark web marketplaces over a 2-year period. The initial purchase in early 2023 was 40,000 records for approximately $60,000 in cryptocurrency. By late 2024, the database had grown to 280,000 records. Dobrynin had developed a matching algorithm, software that paired physical characteristics of workers with identities in the database. A 28-year-old male from Guatemala would receive documents matching a real social security number belonging to, say, a 26-year-old male from Texas. Close enough in age and gender to avoid triggering basic verification checks. The database was organized by category: deceased persons, minors, incarcerated individuals, elderly with no recent credit activity. Each category had different pricing and different risk levels. Identities of deceased persons were cheapest. They were less likely to trigger fraud alerts, but more likely to fail enhanced verification. Identities of living adults with dormant credit files were the most expensive. They could pass even detailed background checks. FBI cyber analysts later described the system as one of the most sophisticated identity fabrication operations they had encountered outside of state-sponsored intelligence services. While the FBI worked the financial and digital evidence, HSI deployed undercover agents. In November 2025, 2 HSI officers posed as undocumented workers seeking employment at ProWork's branch office in Lima, Ohio. The undercover agents walked into the office on a Tuesday morning. They told the receptionist they were looking for work. They were directed to a back room. A ProWork employee, later identified as branch supervisor Raul Sandoval, asked if they had documentation. They said no. Sandoval didn't hesitate. He produced a laminated price sheet. 3 options: basic package, $3,500, Social Security card and state ID. Standard package, $5,000, Social Security card, state ID, and work authorization form. Premium package, $8,000, all documents plus a permanent resident card and matching credit history. He explained the payment plan. The cost would be deducted from their paychecks over the first 8 to 12 weeks of employment. He told them the documents were high quality and that no one has ever had a problem. The undercover agents recorded the entire conversation on concealed audio devices. They agreed to the standard package. 4 days later, they received their documents. The Social Security numbers they were given belonged to a deceased 71-year-old woman in Akron and an 8-year-old boy in Youngstown. The agents reported back. ProWork was not just aware of the fraud. ProWork was the fraud. Operation Paper Trail expanded. The FBI identified 19 branch offices across 3 states. Each one was operating the same system. Workers came in, got documents, went to work at client sites. The money flowed upward, from workers to branch managers to the Dayton headquarters to Whitfield's personal accounts. But the investigation revealed something else, something that changed the scope of the case entirely. ProWork's client companies were not all innocent bystanders. HSI agents examined contracts between ProWork and its client firms. Several of the largest clients, including 2 poultry processors, a major fulfillment center operator, and a commercial construction firm, had unusual contract provisions. They paid ProWork a premium of 15 to 20% above standard staffing rates. In return, ProWork guaranteed full documentation compliance and assumed all liability for worker verification. In normal staffing arrangements, the client company shares responsibility for I-9 verification. These contracts explicitly shifted all responsibility to ProWork. Why would a client company pay more for that arrangement? The answer, investigators concluded, was plausible deniability. The client companies needed workers. They couldn't find enough authorized workers to fill their positions. By hiring ProWork at premium rates and contractually insulating themselves from verification responsibilities, they created a paper wall between themselves and the fraud. 3 corporate executives at client companies were later indicted as co-conspirators. Prosecutors allege they knew or should have known that ProWork was supplying workers with fraudulent documents. Internal emails recovered from one poultry processing company included a message from its HR director to the COO. ProWork's people all have clean docs. Don't ask how. That email would become Exhibit 47A in the federal case. By December 2025, Operation Paper Trail had assembled enough evidence for simultaneous warrants. But the logistics were formidable. 19 offices, 7 client work sites, 3 states. An estimated 200 targets including ProWork employees, branch managers, and co-conspirators at client companies. And the FBI had intelligence suggesting that Whitfield maintained an emergency protocol, a system to destroy evidence if she received any indication of law enforcement interest. The emergency protocol was real. DeBrennan had configured the identity database with a remote wipe capability. A single phone call to a pre-programmed number would trigger the deletion of all 280,000 records. Whitfield also kept a paper shredder rated for continuous operation in her office, and the Dayton basement contained a commercial incinerator originally purchased, according to receipts, for document disposal services. The FBI's Operational Technology Division was tasked with neutralizing the digital destruction capability before the raids. They obtained authorization to intercept the remote wipe signal. On the night of January 21, 2026, a technical team positioned near the Dayton headquarters deployed a cellular signal interceptor that would block any outgoing call from Whitfield's known phone numbers to the wipe trigger number. The pre-raid briefing took place at 3 a.m. on January 22nd at the FBI's Cleveland field office. 400 agents from 3 agencies, FBI, ICE-HSI, and IRS Criminal Investigation, received their assignments. Each team had a specific target, a specific entry plan, and a specific evidence collection protocol. Subscribe now. The details of the raid itself are next, and this channel covers federal operations like this every week. The raid launched at 5:42 a.m. Eastern Time. In Dayton, the primary entry team breached the front door of ProWork's headquarters on West 3rd Street. The building was a converted 2-story commercial space, offices on the first floor, Whitfield's executive suite on the second, and the production facility in the basement. The entry team secured the first floor in under 90 seconds. 2 employees were present, early arrivals for the morning shift. They were detained without incident. The basement team descended a narrow staircase behind a locked door marked Storage. The lock was defeated with a breaching tool. What they found matched the intelligence: a fully operational document production facility, 4 commercial card printers, 2 hologram overlay presses, 3 lamination stations, a UV reactive ink system, boxes of blank cardstock, holographic overlays, and pre-printed templates for Social Security cards, Ohio State IDs, Indiana State IDs, and Michigan State IDs. On a desk, 3 laptops, all powered on, all connected to the identity database. The remote wipe had not been triggered. The signal interception had worked. FBI digital forensics agents immediately began imaging the hard drives. The database contained 280,000 stolen identity records, organized into the categories Dobrynin had designed. Cross-referencing with ProWork's payroll records would later confirm that approximately 9,000 of those identities had been actively used to create worker documents. At Whitfield's home in Upper Arlington, a residential suburb of Columbus, agents arrived at 5:44 a.m. She answered the door after repeated knocking. She was placed under arrest, read her Miranda rights, and transported to the FBI's Columbus resident agency. Agents executing a search warrant at the residence found $47,000 in cash in a bedroom safe, along with 3 encrypted USB drives and a second cell phone, a prepaid device not previously known to investigators. David Mercer, Whitfield's brother-in-law and the production facility manager, was arrested at his apartment in Kettering, a Dayton suburb. He was found with printing supplies in his vehicle, a box of holographic overlays and blank cardstock, suggesting he had been transporting materials between the facility and an unknown secondary location. Dobrynin was arrested at a residence in Centerville, Ohio. On his personal computer, agents found communications with dark web identity brokers, cryptocurrency transaction records, and backup copies of the identity database stored on external hard drives. He also possessed 4 counterfeit passports, 2 Ukrainian, 1 Canadian, 1 Romanian, all bearing his photograph but with different names. Across the 19 branch offices, the pattern was consistent. Agents entered, secured the premises, detained employees, and began evidence collection. At the Lima, Ohio branch, where the undercover operation had taken place, agents found a locked cabinet containing 312 pre-made identity packages, each in a sealed envelope labeled with a worker's first name and a numerical code. At the Fort Wayne, Indiana branch, a branch manager attempted to destroy documents by feeding them into a shredder. Agents stopped him. The partially shredded documents were later reconstructed by the FBI laboratory and revealed records of payments from 219 workers. At the 7 client work sites, HSI agents conducted orderly workplace assessments. Workers were interviewed, their documents examined. At the Logansport, Indiana poultry plant, the site of the original I-9 audit, 287 workers were found to be using documents that matched records in the ProWork database. Similar numbers emerged at other sites. By 8 a.m. on January 22nd, the operation was effectively complete. 138 arrests, 19 offices secured, thousands of fraudulent documents seized, the identity database preserved intact. The federal grand jury in the Southern District of Ohio returned a 47-count indictment on February 6, 2026. Karen Whitfield faced charges including conspiracy to commit identity fraud, production of false identification documents, wire fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, and harboring undocumented aliens for profit. She faced a maximum sentence of over 100 years if convicted on all counts. She was denied bail. The judge cited flight risk, noting the discovery of Dobrynin's 4 counterfeit passports, and the $47,000 in cash at Whitfield's residence. David Mercer was charged with 23 counts including conspiracy, identity document fraud, and money laundering. Dobrynin faced 31 counts including unauthorized access to computer systems, identity theft, conspiracy, and possession of fraudulent travel documents. 14 branch managers were charged as co-conspirators. Among them was Raul Sandoval, the Lima branch supervisor who had offered identity packages to the undercover HSI agents. His recorded conversation became a centerpiece of the prosecution's evidence. 3 corporate executives at client companies were also indicted. The HR director, whose "Don't Ask How" email became Exhibit 47A, was charged with conspiracy to harbor undocumented workers and aiding and abetting identity fraud. The other 2 executives faced similar charges. The remaining defendants included branch office employees, a courier who transported documents between the Dayton facility and outlying branches, and 2 individuals identified as recruiters, people who actively sought undocumented workers in communities across Ohio and Indiana, directing them to ProWork offices. As of March 2026, plea negotiations are ongoing for multiple defendants. Whitfield has pleaded not guilty to all charges. Her defense attorney issued a statement calling the charges dramatically overstated and arguing that ProWork was primarily a legitimate staffing business. Dobrynin has reportedly entered into cooperation discussions with prosecutors, though no formal agreement has been announced. Mercer pleaded guilty on February 28, 2026 to conspiracy and money laundering. His sentencing is scheduled for June. Sandoval also pleaded guilty to conspiracy and identity document fraud. The financial recovery effort is still in its early stages. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division identified approximately $14 million in assets linked to Whitfield, including the Upper Arlington home, 2 investment properties in Columbus, a vacation property in Hilton Head, South Carolina, 3 vehicles, and multiple bank and brokerage accounts. Asset forfeiture proceedings are underway, but investigators believe significant funds remain unaccounted for. ProWork's total revenue over 3 years exceeded $270 million. Documented worker payments for identity packages totaled approximately $45 million. Even accounting for legitimate business expenses, payroll, and overhead, forensic accountants estimate that between $8 and $12 million in profits were moved through cryptocurrency channels that have not yet been traced. Dobrynen's cooperation, if it materializes, may help locate those funds. The victim count is enormous and still growing. The 280,000 individuals whose identities were in the database are being notified through a process coordinated by the Federal Trade Commission and the Social Security Administration. Of those, approximately 9,000 had their identities actively used. These individuals face years of credit monitoring, tax dispute resolution, and bureaucratic correction. Among the victims, a 7-year-old girl in Columbus, whose Social Security number had been used by 3 different ProWork workers at 3 different job sites over 2 years. Her parents discovered the fraud when they attempted to open a college savings account and were told their daughter already had reported income of $42,000. A deceased Korean War veteran in Toledo whose number had been used by 12 different workers. His surviving daughter received IRS notices claiming her father owed back taxes on wages he had supposedly earned 3 years after his death. These cases are not unusual, they are typical. The workers themselves, the roughly 9,000 undocumented individuals who had purchased identity packages, face a different set of consequences. Most were detained during or after the raids. As of March 2026, ICE has initiated removal proceedings against approximately 6,000 of them. Many had been living and working in Ohio, Indiana, and Michigan for years. They had families, children in school, apartments, lives built on documents produced in a Dayton basement. Some of these workers are themselves victims, people who were told by ProWork that the documents were necessary and legal, that this was simply how the system worked. Others understood exactly what they were purchasing. The distinction matters in theory. In immigration enforcement, it often matters less than it should. There are pieces of this case that remain unresolved, the secondary production location. When David Mercer was arrested, he had printing supplies in his vehicle. Investigators believe he was transporting materials to a second document production facility, a backup operation in case the Dayton basement was compromised. That facility has not been located. Mercer has not disclosed its whereabouts, and his plea agreement reportedly does not require him to. The dark web brokers. Dobrynen purchased 280,000 stolen identities from 3 separate dark web vendors. Those vendors have not been identified. The cryptocurrency payments, approximately $200,000 total, flowed through mixing services that obscured their destination. The FBI's cyber division is investigating, but dark web vendor identification cases can take years to resolve if they resolve at all. The full client list. The indictment names 7 client worksites. But ProWork's records indicate contracts with at least 31 companies over 3 years. Federal investigators have not publicly addressed the remaining 24 companies. Whether they were aware of the fraud, benefited from it, or were genuinely deceived remains an open question. And there is one more detail. During the forensic examination of Dobrynen's computers, analysts discovered a folder containing identity datasets that had not yet been integrated into the ProWork database. These were recent purchases, acquired in September and October 2025, just weeks before the investigation began. The folder contained an additional 120,000 stolen identities. Identities that were never used by ProWork. The question that investigators cannot yet answer: were those identities intended for ProWork's expansion, or were they being acquired for resale to other operations? If ProWork was also selling identity data wholesale, the network extends far beyond Ohio. What happened with ProWork National Staffing could not have worked without multiple systems failing simultaneously. E-Verify, the federal system designed to catch exactly this type of fraud, flagged discrepancies. but only when employers actually ran the checks. ProWork submitted I-9 forms that appeared complete. Client companies relied on ProWork's documentation. State agencies issued real IDs based on ProWork's fabricated supporting documents. Banks accepted structured deposits that should have triggered suspicion. No single point of failure. Multiple points of failure. All at once. All for years. ProWork operated for 3 years. 19 offices, 3 states, 11,000 workers placed annually. $1.1 billion in total economic damage. The company has been dissolved. Its offices are empty. Karen Whitfield awaits trial in a federal detention facility. The basement print shop in Dayton has been dismantled, its equipment tagged as evidence. But the conditions that created ProWork still exist. The labor shortage in meatpacking, poultry, construction, and warehousing has not decreased. The demand for temporary workers exceeds the legal supply. Staffing agencies continue to fill the gap, and somewhere on dark web marketplaces that federal agents monitor but cannot shut down, databases of stolen identities are still for sale. The machines in that Dayton basement are gone. The demand that kept them running is not.